Hi everyone, it's Raylene A. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome if you're new. On my channel, I go over cybersecurity aspects, topics, and tie them into lawyers who are dealing with cybersecurity crimes or issues in general. And I break them down for beginners to understand in a more complex way, but obviously not advanced because I'm still learning as well, and this is my research part of becoming a cyber attorney myself. So yeah, let's get right into it. Hopefully by the end of this recap of my research, we are going to understand network protocols from MAC addresses to TCP. So one of the more prominent things that came up was the OSI map. Now you're probably thinking, what is an OSI? OSI just means Open Systems Interconnection Model. It is a conceptual framework created by the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, Organization for Standardization, or ISO, that divides network communications into 7 distinct layers. Okay, so let's go over those 7 distinct layers. So of course, some of these layers are going to just be strictly IT, computer related, and then there's other layers are going to have the more legal aspect that cyber lawyers are going to want to pay more attention to. So layer number 1 and 2 are the physical and the data link. So the tech side of this is essentially going to be like the cables and the Wi-Fi waves, and the MAC addresses. And MAC addresses are just these numbers that identify a computer or device. The physical device, identify the physical device. And typically you would use like the MAC address to see where that device is, or for example, you would use like an IP address to figure out where that device is connected onto Wi-Fi, on what Wi-Fi vicinity is it connected to. Okay. So the legal intersection, premises liabilities. For example, if a rubber ducky, USB, or a Wi-Fi pineapple is used, the legal argument shifts from a digital hack to a failure in physical security. MAC addresses link a specific device to a specific owner. So yeah, that's essentially what it meant. It's a number that that tells you what specific device it is, and apparently if you know who that MAC address is assigned to, or who that device is assigned to, you can have it linked to that particular owner. So that is just the techie side. Probably for cyber lawyers, we would want to understand this generally, but that doesn't mean that we would have to understand it in pure detail. So let's move on to layer number 3, which is the network, or for example, the router. So this is where the IP address and routing comes in. That's going to be the technical part. But the legal part is the personal jurisdiction, meaning understanding who is using the judging based off their IP addresses, who's using the network, and if they are right. So for lawyers, it would be the IP addresses is just helping them understand who is using the network, and that's what it means to be in a personal jurisdiction. Excuse me. For example, under the 2026 Ninth Circuit ruling in Freemen versus 3 Commas Technologies, collecting IP data creates constructive knowledge of a user's location, allowing courts to establish jurisdiction over foreign platforms. So essentially, as lawyers, we would understand if it is in our territory or not. Let's say, for example, if you're a U.S. lawyer and the IP address is showing that it's coming from a foreign area, it would have that distinction that we don't govern under the same rules unless they're also part of the European Union. And this is just to help make sure that, hey, you guys do things your way, we do things our way, but once you're in our territory, we will know that based on your IP address, MAC address, etc. Layer 4 is transport, which is the connection, and this is typically TCP, UDP, and TCP, UDP are just technical ways of saying that devices are communicating with each other. They're sending information to each other and receiving it. Again, as a cyber attorney, you don't need to know this in particular, but just knowing around what nature it is. Actually, just knowing that they have some kind of a handshake, basically saying, hi, I'm one device and I'm one end device and I'm another end device and I'm sending stuff to you and I'm sending stuff to you, and we get that information and we handshake. That's essentially what it is. But in the nature of research, let's just make sure we know what TCP and UDP stands for. TCP is Transmission Control Protocol, and it's often called Connection-Oriented Protocol. It is designed for reliability and accuracy rather than pure speed. So the data is sent. TCP performs a three-way handshake to ensure both the sender and the receiver are ready. It numbers every packet so they can be reassembled in the correct order. And the benefit of this is that the packet is, if the packet is lost or corrupted during the transit, TCP will automatically ask for it to be resent. And it's commonly used for web browsers like HTTP or HTTPS, which is the same thing. One is just secured, the other one isn't. Email and file transfers. Email can be referred to as SMTP, and transfers can be referred to as FTP. So, because TCP tracks connections so closely, it provides excellent session and evidence for investigators to prove a persistent connection existed between two IP addresses, basically showing that two end devices were chatting or handshaking or communicating. And then of course UDP is another handshake. It's a user datagram protocol. That's what it stands for. And it is a connectionless protocol. It is designed for speed and efficiency, often referred to a fire and forget. So it works by sending data packets or datagrams immediately without checking if the receiver is ready or if the data arrived safely. It does not reorder packets or ask for resends. The benefit is that it has extremely low latency, meaning no delays caused by retransmitting lost data. And it's commonly used for video streaming like Netflix and YouTube, online gaming, or voice over IP, VoIP, or Zoom. In these cases, a dropped packet just looks like a tiny glitch in a video, which is better than the whole video freezing to wait for a missing frame. And of course, UDP is harder to track for attribution because it lacks the formal handshake logs found in TCP, making it a common choice for DDoS, which is distributed denial of service attacks. And that essentially just means, think of it as many robots trying to attack a computer all at once. So this is for speed. We don't really care about the accuracy. If we get enough brute force, something has to budge. Essentially, that's what DDoS, the idea of it. Okay, so that's a little deep dive into layer 4, which again was just the transport or the connection part of the OSI. Layer 5 is the session layer. Its primary job is to act as the dialogue controller. It establishes, manages, and terminates connections or sessions between local and remote applications. If layers 1 through 4 are responsible for getting the data to the right computer, layer 5 is responsible for making sure the two applications can actually have continuous conversation. Its main functions are dialogue control, session management, and checkpointing. Dialogue control meaning that it determines who sends data and when, like half duplex or full duplex communication. Session management being handling the opening and closing of a connection. If a connection is interrupted, the session layer can attempt to recover it. And then checkpointing, which is synchronization, where it's most crucial for large file transfers because layer 5 inserts checkpoints into the data stream. So if the network fails, the transfer can resume from the last checkpoint instead of having to start everything over from the beginning. and half duplex, full duplex, just for the sake of research. Let's see what is the difference. Half duplex, or HDX, is where data can travel in both directions, but only one direction at a time. So devices share a single communication channel, and when one device sends, the other must listen. And if both try to talk at one time or a collision occurs, then the data is lost. So older Ethernet hubs use half duplex because this is a required protocol called CSMA-CD, or carrier sense multiple access with collision detection, to manage traffic and referee who gets to speak next. So in some, half duplex is sending it in both directions, but one communicates, one talks at a time. So it's basically a way configuration of communication. And then full duplex is when the data can travel in both directions simultaneously. I'm pretty sure this is what is used in satellites. I'll look that up after we officially learn what full duplex is. So when devices use separate channels or separate wire pairs for sending and receiving. This eliminates collision entirely because the upload lane and the download lane never cross. Okay, so this is typically used in modern Ethernet switches, and Wi-Fi 6/7 operate in full duplex. Okay, we just said that. A 1 Gbps full duplex link can technically handle 2 Gbps of total throughput, because you can have 2 of the 1 Gbps's done at once, or travel at once. This is a little off topic. Like I said, that it's good to understand the technical world as a cyber attorney, but you don't really need to know all these little details, but it doesn't hurt to be knowledgeable. So satellites can use either, but most modern satellite internet systems like Starlink or Viasat and high-speed communication satellites use full duplex. Okay, so I was right. Most of them do use full duplex, which makes sense, right? I would think so, because they have a lot of work. The satellite is constantly bouncing off waves, sending waves and receiving waves. Okay, let's get back. That's enough of the deep dive of layer 5. Let's get back into the other layers. So let's combine layer 6 and 7, which is essentially just presentation and application. So the tech part is the TLS encryption and the HTTP or API interfaces. Let's talk about what TLS is. Like I said, okay, what is TLS encryption? It's cool to learn these things, okay? Okay, so TLS stands for Transport Layer Security. It is the industry standard cryptographic protocol that provides privacy and data integrity between two communicating applications. When you see the padlock icon on your browser or an HTTPS URL, you are seeing the TLS in action. How it works: before any data is sent, the client or your browser and the server perform a TLS handshake to set the rules for the conversation. The cipher suit negotiation. So they agree on which language or encryption algorithms they're going to speak in. They're both going to speak in. Then the server presents a digital certificate to prove it is who it says it is. Oh, have you guys ever seen when you try to log onto a website and it says you can't reach the website, check the certificate? That's why it's not letting you access the website, because it might it's signaling that there might be a little mismatch here. You're not able to authenticate you are who you say you are. So basically it wouldn't be safe to log on to that website. And if you're using a secure browser like Microsoft or Chrome, chances are they're not gonna let you bypass it. I think you might be able to in some ways, but most of the time if it's using that encryption, the TLS, it's not gonna let you. So yeah, they securely create a shared session key that will be used to scramble the data. So basically you can browse all you want without anyone being easily able to understand what you're doing or how you're doing it on the browser, unless they have that key, that encryption key, which I'm sure whichever browser you're using has that encryption key. Okie dokie. So the 3 pillars of TLS is to encrypt, authenticate, and then verify, which is the integrity part, which we just went over. Under laws like the CCPA or GDPR, if you don't know what those are, I have made a video about the 5 major privacy laws. But if the data is encrypted with a strong protocol like the TLS 1.3 and is stolen, it often doesn't count as a breach for notification purposes. This is the safe harbor. Proper encryption can save a company millions in fines. Right, because they're not going to be able to even know what they're looking at. They're going to have a whole bunch of random scrambles in their face, and I mean, GG's if you don't know if you don't have the encryption. Okay, so the difference between the 1.2 and the 1.3 is just that the 1.2 is obviously weaker and it's slower, right? That's why we've upgraded it to the more modern one, which is faster and stronger. And the 1.2 handshake is partly visible, while the 1.3 is fully encrypted. And I'm sure we'll work to probably get better versions too, eventually. But that is layer 6 and 7. Well, let's talk about the application. So the HTTP and the API interfaces. Let's talk about that. In the OSI model, HTTP and APIs live at layer 7, the application layer. This is where the human meets the network. If TLS, or layer 6, is the secure envelope, HTTP is a letter inside, and an API is the set of instructions on how to reply. So HTTP, also known as Hypertext Transfer Protocol, is the foundation of data exchange on the web. It is the request response protocol. Your browser is the client who sends a request to the server, basically saying, like, for example, get me the home page, and then the server sends back a response, which is the website's code, and then boom, the website is in your face. Then HTTPS is just HTTP wrapped in TLS encryption, which we did discuss earlier. So basically without the S, it means that it isn't secured, and with the S, it means that it is secured. And that security comes from the TLS encryption. HTTP has everything in plain text, including passwords and everything else that might be viable, which is why we use the TLS, so that we make sure people who steal this information or obtain this information can't easily access the plain data that is there, especially with people using the internet all the time, putting a lot of important information on the internet, such as credit card numbers, even little stuff like birth dates and anything really. We need it to be encrypted because we don't know what other people out there who can access that information will do with it, especially if you're on a company's website and they have promised you in their privacy policy long letter that you didn't even read and you just pressed agreed on that they will protect your data. It doesn't matter what the heck you're doing on their site, they better put that TLS on there. Did I say TLS? That's what it is, right? Yeah, TLS on there, and make sure that not everyone can just access that plain text information. So, looking at it from a cyber attorney perspective, most cases under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the CFAA, involve someone using an API or a web form in a way that it wasn't intended. For an example, if a person uses an automated script to scrape or pull millions of user profiles via a GET request, did they exceed authorized access? Okay, so recent 2024-2026 ruling suggests that if the data is public, scraping might not be a crime, but it could still be a breach of contract or terms of service. And then what about API insecurity and negligence? If a company leaves an API unauthenticated, meaning anyone can request the data without a password, and a hacker steals a database, the company is often sued for gross negligence. So in a legal, through a legal perspective, you would argue that the company failed to follow OWASP top 10 standards, the industry benchmark for API security. That is what API stands for, Application Programming Interface. It is the way for two different pieces of software to talk to each other without human intervention. So like a digital waiter. You are the user, and then you give the waiter an order, the data request, and then the waiter takes it to the kitchen, the server, and then it brings back your food, which is the data, right? So API is just that, like, for example, if I had to make it super easy for you, when you click a button, the button suggests that there's a certain information that you want to obtain. Let's say the button was supposed to take you to the homepage, like the example you used earlier. The digital waiter would obtain the information for that homepage, and that would bring it back to you. There's also post, which means you can send new data, and there's put, meaning you can update existing data, and then of course delete is removing data. So API is just application program interface, basically just being able to interact with the program. To put it simply, the way that you interact with the program, or more of the how you can interact with the program and how that works, really. Okay, moving on to the next. So yeah, that was layer 6 and 7, and that was all encapsulated with that was all encapsulated with the legal OSI map, or the OSI map, and I just kind of added legal understanding to it. But now let's go over the anatomy of a modern network. So you can have a segmented network, you can have a flat network. Let's talk about the bulkhead theory, or the segmentation. In 2026, network segmentation is required safeguard under the HIPAA security rule updates. If your guest Wi-Fi isn't isolated from your patient database, you are legally liable for the entire breach footprint, not just the entry point. And then there's Zero Trust Architect, or ZTA, which is no longer just a trend, it's a new legal standard of care. If a breach occurs and you aren't using microsegmentation, a judge may rule your security was commercially unreasonable. And this is about the 2025-2026 privacy litigation trends. Troopman Pepper. The anatomy of a modern network. Okay, well, let's talk about what a segmented network means. A segmented network divides the whole into smaller isolated subnetworks that act as independent zones. Oh yes, I do remember studying this. Don't remember where or when, but I do remember. And essentially, you would want to break off those zones so that if one place gets infiltrated, it only affects that area and everyone else would be protected. Even though it costs more resources, probably costs more money and probably more time as well. It's just better in the long run, just in case anything does happen. Think of it like packaging or sealing off foods, or let's say like you sealed off a fruit, for example, and one of the fruits start to expire. If the fruits are next to each other, there's a good chance that that fruit is going to be able to easily go on to the next one. But if they're sealed in like separate packages, or you have that little thing that kind of like segments them in the bag, you can just kind of get rid of that one fruit and have that other fruit probably going to be fine. Well, in this case, it will be fine unless that mold or whatever finds its way to go to the next fruit somehow. But for the most part, it's going to be fine because it has no access to the other one because it was sealed off. That's essentially what segmentation is of the network. That's a lot more of like an IT area. Again, as a attorney or lawyer, you're not going to really need to know too deep about these things, but again, it is very valid to know them anyway, which is why I'm doing the deep dive and not just surface leveling. And then let's go over a flat network. So a flat network means that every device can see and talk to every other device. So basically you have a whole bunch of like fruits in the Ziploc bag, and they're kind of just like all touching each other and mixing with each other, and like there's no separation at all between them. They're all just buddy in that bag. So if one bad thing happens to one of them, it's probably going to happen to the rest of them, or to others, at least one other probably. Okay, so let's move on to the third part of networking fundamentals: forensics and the rules of evidence. Forensics, the hearsay exception, FRE 803-6. Excuse me. In court, network logs are hearsay unless they qualify as business records. So you must prove that they were created in a regular course of business and not just generated for the trial. Oh, okay. Right, so this is just a rule. And here's another one. To prove a log hasn't been tampered with, you must use cryptographic hashing, or SHA 256, under the FRE 902.13. A certified hash makes your technical data self-authenticating, saving you from having a forensic expert testify for every single line of code. That's good. That's good. Hearsay, that's hearsay. So essentially, if you have valid evidence or something that could really prove against or for your point, but you don't have it as official business records, it can be exempted as hearsay, and probably be much weaker evidence than it could have been if you had just if you couldn't prove that it was a regular course of business. It was generated in a regular course of business. And then of course for the authentication, if it's hashed, then right, exactly. If it's hashed, like someone has to have had the key for that in order to obtain that information. Right, that basically means you don't need someone to come in there and try to do it letter for letter, character for character, I should say, and can be done itself. Okay, so let's talk about a case study that is related to this topic, and it is the Salt Typhoon. Okay, so there was a Salt Typhoon breach. The breaches of the Salt Typhoon from 2025 to 2026, where attackers bypassed lawful intercept backdoors. The technical challenge was that NetFlow telemetry was used to identify 50 gigabytes of data spikes at 3 a.m. And then the legal challenge here would be under the SEC's 4-day disclosure rule, item 1.05 of Form 8K. We're gonna have to remember all these things, huh? The company had to determine if this was material while the incident was still active. So our job as a cyber attorney would be to ensure the NIST govern function is active so that the board has the oversight needed to make the call. Let's wrap this up, right? Because this video is long enough. Okay, so as we've seen, networking isn't just about speed, it's about defensibility. You cannot govern a network, you cannot map, and you cannot defend a client if you don't understand their packet headers. So essentially in this video, we learned how information talks to each other. We learned how certain laws can apply to certain layers of the OSI. We did a little bit of the deep dive into the technical parts of how the communication works and how the computers work. We talk about certain links to devices such as MAC addresses, IP addresses, and how Wi-Fi waves come into play, how communication waves in general come into play, and then how us as cyber attorneys will be able to interpret this information and utilize it to effectively defend our company or help protect our company that we're working with. And yeah, that's essentially it. If you guys want me to do a deeper dive, more so into the actual technical side of it, I try to keep my videos technical and law merged so that we have a good understanding of the technical side of things and we're not just looking at the laws, because it's a lot easier to synthesize information when we know majority of the parts of all the working parts that are going into let's say a breach, right? It would be easier for us to understand right away what's going on and to communicate that to people who don't really know the law and they mainly just know the tech. If you talk to them in their language, say, oh, the network, they found that the IP address came back to our network and that it was this MAC address, it was this device because they found this MAC address was a part of the breach or blah, blah, blah. You know, they'll understand. The person who is a part of the tech team would understand a lot easier than you saying, this law was broken because blah, blah, blah. They would have to do an extra, they would have an extra layer of, extra barrier, I should say, or language barrier. They would have a language barrier. They'd have to try and connect the dots a little more in their heads, whereas it would be much easier for you to just tell them straight up how it is in their language, so they can instantly understand and fix the problem, or implement a mitigation tactic through mutual understanding of how or what could go wrong and how to prevent it. Anyway, that's enough of me yapping. This has been Project 6 Network Fundamentals plus the law side of it. We talked about everything that I mentioned. And I'll see you on my next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.